Elvis Presley watched a landlord change the locks on a widow's door on a January morning in Memphis. Then, he paid 6 months of rent in cash and never told anyone he had done it. It was January 1966, and Elvis was 31 years old. The touring schedule had thinned out in the winter months, and the film productions ran on a Hollywood calendar that left gaps in January. Long, unstructured weeks when Elvis was in Memphis with no particular place to be, and no particular obligation pulling him anywhere. He used those weeks the way he had always used them, moving through the city at odd hours in plain clothes, in the black Cadillac or the truck, through neighborhoods he had known since before anyone outside of Memphis had any reason to know his name. Whitehaven was his neighborhood in the way that a place becomes yours when you have lived close enough to it, long enough to know its rhythms. Graceland sat on the south edge of it, and the streets that ran east and west off Elvis Presley Boulevard were streets Elvis had driven so many times that he knew which houses had dogs and which corners flooded when it rained hard and which businesses closed early on Fridays. He was not a man who lived behind the wall of Graceland, the way that his fame sometimes suggested. He moved, he paid attention, he noticed what was on the streets he drove through. On the morning of January 11th, 1966, he was driving south on a side street 3 blocks east of the boulevard when he saw the landlord. The man's name was Gerald Pitts. He was 61 years old, a property owner who managed a small portfolio of rental houses in Whitehaven and the streets immediately south of it. Modest frame houses, most of them built in the late 1940s, most of them occupied by working families who paid their rent in cash or by money order at the first of the month. Pitts drove a green Chevrolet truck and carried his tools in a metal box in the bed. He was not an unusual man in any respect. He was a landlord who owned rental property and managed it with the specific attention of a man for whom the property was a business, and the tenants were the variable that determined whether the business was profitable. He was standing on the porch of a white frame house on Evelyn Avenue with a new lock cylinder in his hand when Elvis drove past. Elvis slowed. The house was a small one, a front porch, 2 steps up from the walk, a window on each side of the door. The yard was kept. There was a child's bicycle leaning against the porch rail, red with white handlebar streamers. There was a pot of dead marigolds beside the front door, the stems still standing in their dry soil from the previous summer, not yet cleared. The woman on the porch was named Dorothy Simmons. She was 34 years old, and she had been living in that house on Evelyn Avenue for 3 years. She was wearing a blue wool coat over her house dress, and she was holding a cardboard box against her chest with both arms, and 2 children were standing behind her, a girl of about 8 and a boy of about 6, both in their school clothes, both very still in the way that children go still when they understand that something serious is happening around them without fully understanding what it is. Her husband, Robert Simmons, had been a pipe fitter at the Memphis light gas and water plant on Lamar Avenue. He had died in October 1965, 12 weeks before the morning on Evelyn Avenue, from a heart attack at the age of 37. He had been working the early shift. He had clocked in at 6 in the morning and was dead before 8. Dorothy had been notified by a man from the plant who came to the door in his work clothes because there was no protocol at Memphis Light Gas and Water in 1965 for how to tell a woman that her husband had died at a pipe-fitting station before the morning was half over. The November rent had been late. Dorothy had paid it on the 14th with money borrowed from her sister in Germantown. The December rent she had not paid at all. She had meant to. She had the intention, and she did not have the money, which is a combination that produces a particular kind of dread, the knowledge that the intention is real and the money is not, and that the gap between them is going to have consequences that good intentions cannot prevent. On January 3rd, Gerald Pitts had come to the door with a notice. On January 8th, he had come again. On January 11th, he came with the lock cylinder. Dorothy had opened the door when she heard him on the porch. She had the cardboard box already in her hands because some part of her had known when she woke that morning that the day had arrived. The children came out behind her. The girl took the boy's hand without being told to. Pitts had not been unkind exactly. He had not raised his voice. He had explained in the flat specific language of a man delivering a business outcome that the property had 2 months of unpaid rent and that he was within his legal right under Tennessee rental law to change the locks, and that he was sorry for her situation, but that he had a mortgage on the property himself and could not carry the arrears indefinitely. Dorothy had not argued. She had stood on her porch with the cardboard box and her 2 children and watched Gerald Pitts take the old lock cylinder out of her front door. Elvis had pulled over to the curb on the opposite side of Evelyn Avenue. He sat in the Cadillac for a moment. He looked at the porch. He looked at the 2 children. He looked at the bicycle leaning against the porch rail with the white handlebar streamers. He got out of the car. He crossed the street without hurrying. He was wearing a plain dark jacket over a white shirt, dark trousers, no sunglasses. January in Memphis was overcast and cold, and the light was flat. He looked like a man who had pulled over because he saw something he wanted to understand better. Pitts was still working the new cylinder into the lock mechanism when Elvis came up the porch steps. He looked up. He did not immediately recognize the man standing at the top of his porch steps, which was the thing that happened with Elvis in plain clothes in daylight. The recognition came slowly, assembled itself piece by piece, and by the time it arrived, you'd already been looking at him for several seconds without knowing why he seemed familiar. "Ma'am," Elvis said to Dorothy. He did not look at Pitts. He looked at Dorothy and then at the 2 children. He looked at the cardboard box she was holding. Dorothy stared at him. The recognition that had been slow to reach Pitts reached her faster. Something in the voice, something in the face, something assembled in the first second of looking that her mind confirmed before she had consciously decided to confirm it. Her mouth opened and she said nothing for a moment. "That's all right," Elvis said, as if she'd been about to say something that needed reassuring. He turned to Pitts. Pitts had set his tools down on the porch rail and was looking at Elvis with the expression of a man who has assembled the recognition and is now recalculating the morning he thought he was having. "How much does she owe you?" Elvis said. Pitts looked at him. He looked at Dorothy. He looked back at Elvis. "Sir, this is a private matter between me and my tenant. How much?" 2 months, Pitts said. $42 a month, $84 and a $5 late fee, $89 total. Elvis reached into his jacket pocket. He took out his wallet. He counted out bills and held them out toward Pitts, not placed them anywhere, held them out, which required Pitts to take them from his hand. Pitts looked at the money. He took it. "That's 6 months, Elvis said. 89 covers what's owed. The rest is paid forward." He looked at Pitts with the specific quality of attention that people who met Elvis privately described across decades of interviews: unhurried, direct, without performance or threat, the look of a man stating a fact and waiting for the fact to be acknowledged. 6 months, he said again. Pitts nodded. He put the money in his shirt pocket. "Put the old lock back," Elvis said. Pitts looked at his tools on the porch rail. He looked at the new cylinder in his hand. He looked at Elvis. He put the old lock back. When he was done, he picked up his toolbox and walked down the porch steps without saying anything further, and got in his green Chevrolet truck and drove north on Evelyn Avenue. Dorothy Simmons stood on her porch with the cardboard box still in her arms. She was looking at Elvis the way you look at something that has not yet resolved itself into a category you have a name for. The girl was looking at Elvis too. The boy had moved to stand beside the bicycle and was holding one of the white handlebar streamers in his hand. Elvis looked at the girl. "How old are you?" he said. 8, she said. She said it with the directness of a child who has decided that whatever is happening, she is going to participate in it. "What's your name?" "Carol." Elvis nodded. "You're doing real good today, Carol," he said. He said it the way you say a thing you mean to the person you are saying it to, without any of the air that compliments accumulate when they are not quite sincere. He looked at Dorothy. "Ma'am," he said, "you're going to be all right." Dorothy Simmons opened her mouth. She said the only thing that came to her, which was the only thing there was to say, which was, "Thank you." Elvis touched the collar of his jacket. He went down the porch steps and crossed Evelyn Avenue and got into the Cadillac and drove south on the side street and turned onto the boulevard and was gone. Dorothy stood on her porch for a while after the car turned the corner. She was still holding the cardboard box. Carol stood beside her. The boy was still by the bicycle. After a while, Dorothy went back inside. She set the cardboard box on the kitchen table and looked at it for a moment, and then unpacked it, the framed photograph of Robert that she had taken off the wall that morning, the children's extra shoes, the papers she had gathered from the desk drawer. She put them back where they belonged. She did not tell the story for a long time. Not because she wanted to keep it private, but because she found, when she tried to tell it, that it did not come out right in the telling. That the morning on Evelyn Avenue contained something that shrank when you put it into words, the way certain things shrink when you try to move them from the place where they happened into the open air of a story. She told her sister in Germantown in the spring of 1966. Her sister told her husband. Word moved the way word moves through families, slowly, selectively, attaching itself to the people who found it meaningful and stopping at the people who found it implausible. In January 1977, 7 months before Elvis died, Dorothy Simmons wrote a letter to the fan mail address in Memphis. She described the morning on Evelyn Avenue. She described the 2 children, Carol and the boy whose name was James. She described Gerald Pitts putting the old lock cylinder back. She described what Elvis had said to Carol. She wrote the letter in 2 sittings and sealed it and mailed it on a Friday and did not hear back. Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977. He was 42 years old. The letter Dorothy had mailed in January was among the correspondence received at the fan mail address that year. Whether it was read by anyone before August is not confirmed. What is confirmed is that it was preserved in the General Archive of Fan Correspondence maintained in Memphis in the years following his death. Carol Simmons, Carol Hargrove by the time she was an adult, married name from her first year of teaching, became a school teacher in Shelby County. She taught 4th grade at an elementary school 2 miles from Evelyn Avenue for 23 years. She retired in 2003. She told the story of the January morning to her students every year, not as a story about Elvis Presley, though it was that, but as a story about what paying attention to the right thing at the right moment can do in the life of someone you have never met and will never see again. She did not always use his name. She let the story carry itself on its own terms and told them at the end who the man in the dark jacket had been. James Simmons, the boy with the bicycle, became an electrician. He worked for Memphis Light, Gas, and Water, the same company where his father had worked for 31 years. He retired in 2001. He kept the bicycle until 1982, when it finally became too rusted to ride, and he took it apart in his garage and kept the handlebar streamers in a coffee can on his workbench until the day he moved out of that house. Dorothy Simmons lived on Evelyn Avenue until 1989. She paid her rent on time for the remaining years of Gerald Pitts' ownership and for the 11 years of the subsequent owner's ownership. She moved to Germantown in 1989 to be near her sister, who was by then elderly. She died in 1997. Gerald Pitts sold the house on Evelyn Avenue in 1971. He never spoke of the January morning in any account that has been located. Whether he told anyone what he saw on his own porch that day, the man who had come up the steps in a plain dark jacket and counted out 6 months of rent into his hand and told him to put the old lock back, is not recorded. What is recorded is Carol's account, given in several forms across several decades, consistent in its outline and its central details. The cardboard box, the 2 children, the bicycle with the white streamers, the old lock cylinder going back into the door, and the thing Elvis said to an 8-year-old girl standing on her front porch on a cold January morning in Memphis in 1966. "You're doing real good today, Carol." She remembered it for the rest of her life. She told it to 4th graders for 23 years. She said it was the thing she came back to when she needed to remember what it looked like when someone paid attention to the right thing at the right moment. Not the large gesture, not the announced one, but the small, specific, true one that lands in the place where nothing else reaches. The man who said it drove south on the boulevard and did not look back and did not tell anyone what he had done on Evelyn Avenue that morning. He had stopped because he saw something that needed stopping for. He had done what the situation required. He had gotten back in his car. There is a version of this story that is about the money. $89 plus the 5 months paid forward. A total that in January 1966 was not nothing. It was several weeks of careful work at most of the jobs available to a woman in Whitehaven who had been suddenly alone with 2 children and a mortgage of grief that no amount of money could fully address. But the money was not the story. The money was the mechanism. The story was what he did after the money. The moment he turned to an 8-year-old girl standing very still on her porch in her school clothes on the worst morning of her recent life, and told her, with the directness of someone who meant it completely, that she was doing real good. The girl remembered it for the rest of her life. That is the whole story. That is the part that does not have a dollar amount and does not fit in a wallet and cannot be returned uncashed in a brown envelope from Memphis. Elvis Presley drove south on the boulevard. The morning continued. Evelyn Avenue went on being Evelyn Avenue. The pot of dead marigolds stayed beside the front door until Dorothy cleared it in the spring when she put new ones in.